There's a very specific smell that hits you when you walk onto a proper machine shop floor. It's a heavy industrial blend of synthetic cutting fluid, hot metal, and ozone. For 35 years, that smell has been the first thing to greet me every single morning at 6 a.m. I built Arthur's Precision Machining out of a rented, drafty single-bay garage back in 1988 with a single, second-hand Bridgeport manual mill and a loan my bank barely approved. Today, we operate out of a 40,000 square foot climate-controlled facility. We run 5-axis CNC machines that cost $500,000 apiece. We manufacture high-stress, zero-fail components for the aerospace and defense sectors. We make the landing gear actuators that keep commercial jets from collapsing on the runway. We make turbine housings. Tolerance is down to a 10,000th of an inch. It takes absolute focus, relentless discipline, and a lifetime of dedication to do this work. It's not just metal cutting, it's an exact science. I'm 64 years old now. My name is Arthur. I still walk the shop floor every morning before the first shift clocks in. I still know the names of all 42 of my machinists. I know whose wife just had a baby, whose kid is applying to state college, and whose truck needs a new transmission. My business is my life, and my employees are my responsibility. I pay them well above industry standard, provide top-tier healthcare, and in return, they give me zero-defect parts. It's a system built on mutual respect and hard work. My wife, Helen, is 61. We've been married for 35 years. We met right as I was trying to get the business off the ground. Back then, she was a secretary at a logistics firm, and she seemed to understand the grind. But as the company grew and the money started rolling in, Helen changed. The woman who used to help me pack peanut butter sandwiches for my late-night shifts was replaced by a woman who wouldn't be caught dead in a car that didn't have a German hood ornament. She became deeply entrenched in the local country club scene, spending her days playing tennis, organizing charity galas, and spending money as fast as my machines could print it. I didn't mind, mostly. I was busy. I provided. That was my role. Our son David is 34. I always dreamed of handing the business down to him. It's the classic American dream, right? You build something with your own two hands, you bleed for it. You miss family dinners and school plays for it, also you can pass it on to your blood. But David is not a machinist. David has never operated a lathe. He's never had metal chips burn his forearms. David is a guy who likes wearing $1,000 suits, driving a leased Porsche 911 that the company pays for, and calling himself the vice president of sales. I gave him that title 3 years ago. It was a massive mistake, but I did it mostly to stop Helen from nagging me. She was relentless, constantly telling me how I was holding our boy back, how he had a brilliant business mind that I was suppressing with my blue-collar mentality. So I caved. I put him on the executive payroll. I pay him $120,000 a year as a base salary, plus a healthy expense account. He works maybe 30 hours a week, takes 2-hour lunches at steakhouses, and spends most of his time golfing with people he calls potential leads. In 3 years, he hasn't brought in a single major contract. In fact, he's actively alienated some of my oldest clients with his arrogant, tech bro attitude. He uses words like synergy and disruption to men who just want to know if their titanium parts will be shipped on time. For the last 2 years, David has been relentlessly pressuring me to step down. He wants the CEO title. He wants control of the company accounts. He wants to leverage our hard-earned equity, the building, the machines, the cash reserves I built up to protect us from market downturns, to secure a massive multi-million-dollar loan. His grand vision? To pivot the company toward consumer tech manufacturing. He wants to make flashy, injection-molded plastic casings for startups, a market we know absolutely nothing about, with razor-thin margins and massive overseas competition. I told him no, emphatically. I told him he needs to learn the actual business first. I told him he needs to understand how a CNC machine works, how to read a micrometer, and how to quote a raw material order before he tries to mortgage the building that houses our livelihood. We had a massive screaming match in my office over it. He called me a dinosaur. He said I was standing in the way of progress. I told him progress doesn't mean bankrupting a solvent company to chase a trend. That was when the gaslighting began. I just didn't realize it at the time. It started incredibly small, the kind of things anyone in their 60s might brush off. About 8 months ago, I began misplacing things. My car keys, my reading glasses, important files for client meetings. I've always been meticulously organized. My desk is spotless. My mind has always been sharp, but suddenly I couldn't find a damn thing. I'd set my wallet on the kitchen counter, go to the bathroom, and when I came back, it would be gone. I'd find it 3 hours later tucked inside the pantry behind a box of cereal. Then it escalated to my schedule. I would show up for a lunch meeting with a steel supplier, only to sit at the restaurant for an hour alone. When I called the supplier, they'd tell me the meeting had been canceled. When I checked my Outlook calendar on my phone, the meeting was gone, deleted. When I brought it up at the office, David would look at me with this pitying, condescending expression. He'd put his hand on my shoulder, in front of my employees, and say, "Dad, we talked about this on Tuesday, remember? You told me to cancel it because you said you weren't feeling well. Are you sure you're okay?" I hadn't told him that. I knew I hadn't. But when your own son swears up and down that a conversation happened and looks at you with genuine concern in his eyes, you start to doubt yourself. Helen started planting seeds of doubt everywhere we went, too. It was masterful, the way she did it. We'd be at a dinner party at the club with friends we've known for 20 years. I'd be in the middle of telling a story about a recent fishing trip, and she would gently put her hand on my arm, smile apologetically at the table, and say, "Arthur, honey, you already told that story just 20 minutes ago, remember? Your memory is just slipping a little bit lately." The table would go quiet. People would give me those sympathetic, uncomfortable looks. I would stutter, apologize, and retreat into silence for the rest of the night. I felt a cold, creeping terror starting to build in my chest. Was I losing my mind? My father had passed away from Alzheimer's in his late 70s. I watched that man, strong, vibrant Korean War veteran, slowly disintegrate until he didn't know his own name. I remembered the sterile smell of the care facility. I remembered the empty, terrified look in his eyes when he looked at my mother and asked who she was. It was my deepest, darkest fear. The idea that my brain was rotting from the inside out terrified me more than death itself. I started waking up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified that the walls of my own mind were closing in on me. I'd get out of bed, walk to my home office, and just stare at my hands, trying to remember what I had for breakfast, trying to recite the alphabet backwards, just to prove to myself I was still there. I quietly made an appointment with my primary care doctor for a checkup. He ran some basic cognitive tests. He told me I was under a lot of stress, that I was working too hard for a guy in his mid-60s, and that mild forgetfulness is a normal part of aging. He suggested I take a vacation. But the incidents at the office kept happening. They were accelerating. The breaking point, the moment that almost destroyed everything, was a major contract renewal with Lockheed Martin. They'd been one of our biggest clients for a decade. This contract represented about 30% of our annual revenue. A team of their engineers flew in to review our production capabilities and pricing for the next 3 years. I walked into the boardroom with the thick spec folder David had printed out and placed on my desk that morning. I welcomed the Lockheed team, shook their hands, and opened the folder. Halfway through the presentation, as I was reading off the projected cost analysis for titanium milling, the lead engineer stopped me. He looked confused. "Arthur," he said gently, "those numbers, that can't be right. You're quoting us 50% higher than our agreed-upon baseline, and the production timeline you just read is doubled." I blinked, looking down at the paper. The numbers I was quoting were wildly inaccurate. They were completely wrong. They were financial suicide. I flipped through the pages. The figures had been entirely altered. This wasn't a typo. The entire spreadsheet had been reworked to make us look completely incompetent. I felt the blood drain from my face. I started stammering, flipping back and forth, trying to find the original numbers in my head. The Lockheed engineers exchanged worried glances. David, who was sitting at the end of the table, stood up smoothly. "Gentlemen, I apologize," he said, using his slickest salesman voice. "My father has been dealing with some personal health issues lately. He must have picked up an old, discarded draft from last month's brainstorming session. Let me pull up the correct, finalized numbers on the projector." He completely took over the meeting. He played the hero, saving the day while I sat there, humiliated, looking like a senile old fool who couldn't even read a spreadsheet. We barely saved that $2 million account. When the clients finally left, I confronted David in my office. My hands were shaking. I slammed the folder on my desk. "What the hell was that, David? This is the folder you handed me at 8 o'clock this morning." He looked me dead in the eye. His expression was completely blank, almost bored. "Dad, I gave you the correct file. It had a blue cover. That folder is red. You must have picked up the old draft from your bottom drawer. You're really slipping. It's getting dangerous. You almost cost us our biggest client today. You need to step down before you destroy everything you've built. It's time." He turned and walked out of my office, leaving me alone. I sat in my leather chair for 3 hours. The shop floor hummed beneath my feet, vibrating through the floorboards. I felt sick to my stomach. But as the panic began to subside, something else took its place. Logic. Cold, hard, machinist logic. I know my business. I know my desk. And I knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that the red folder David handed me that morning was the only folder on my desk. There was no blue folder. I don't even keep old drafts in my bottom drawer. My secretary shreds them daily. If I wasn't losing my mind, then my son was actively trying to destroy it. That afternoon, I left work early. I drove to an electronics store 3 towns over. I bought a high-end digital voice recorder. A small, sleek little device the size of a thumb drive, voice-activated with a 48-hour battery life. I also bought software, a keystroke logger, and a hidden screen recording program. I went back to the office at 9 p.m., long after everyone had gone home. I installed the software on my office computer, ensuring it was hidden from the taskbar. Then I took a piece of heavy-duty double-sided tape and stuck the voice recorder underneath the lip of the heavy oak coffee table in the center of my office. Finally, I called the locksmith I trusted and had him change the lock on my office door. Only I had the key. It only took 4 days to catch them. On a Thursday, I told Helen over breakfast that I was going to visit a tooling supplier in Ohio for the day. I told David the same thing. I packed a small overnight bag, drove to the airport, and even checked in. But my flight was delayed. Instead of waiting, I quietly rented a car, drove back to my own industrial park, and parked 3 blocks away behind a diner. Around 2 in the afternoon, I walked back to my factory. I went in through the shipping bay doors. I bypassed the front office completely and quietly walked up the back metal staircase that led directly to the executive hallway. My office door was locked, exactly as I'd left it. I waited until 6 p.m. when the front office staff went home. I slipped into my office, retrieved the voice recorder from under the table, and downloaded the keylogger data from my computer. I drove home, locked myself in my private study, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and began to listen. I sat in the dark, the pale blue glow of my laptop illuminating my face, listening to the 2 people I loved most in the world plot my absolute ruin. David and Helen had been in my office the day before. I'd been down on the shop floor dealing with a machine calibration issue for over 2 hours. David had used a master key, which he wasn't supposed to have, to let Helen in. The audio was crystal clear. Sound of a door closing and locking. David, he's getting worse. He almost figured out the Lockheed file wasn't his mistake. He was staring at me like he wanted to kill me. Helen, sighing. He's too stubborn, David. He's never going to sign the succession papers voluntarily. You know Arthur. He'll die at that desk before he admits he's failing. David, well, we have to do something. If he stays in charge, he's going to block the bank loan. We need that capital to pivot the company. I can't wait 5 more years for him to finally keel over. Helen, we don't need him to step down voluntarily. I had lunch with Dr. Evans yesterday. Dr. Evans, Richard Evans, our country club friend. We play golf together every other Sunday. Our wives went to the same spa. Helen's voice continued, cold, practical, and utterly devoid of empathy. Richard said he's willing to sign the medical evaluation. He's already primed from what I've been telling him at the club. All we need is for Arthur to have 1 more major, public episodes in front of reliable witnesses. Once that happens, Richard will sign the legal affidavit declaring Arthur medically unfit to manage his own affairs due to rapid, early-onset dementia. Once we have that document, I get emergency power of attorney as his wife. We force his medical retirement, and you take over the board as CEO. David laughed on the tape. It was a cruel, sharp sound. God, that's brilliant. I deleted the entire supplier email thread for the new Boeing contract from his server today. When they call him tomorrow asking why he missed the deadline, he's going to absolutely lose his mind on the phone. I'll make sure the HR director is in the room to witness his paranoia. Just make sure you document his reaction, Helen said smoothly. We need a paper trail of his erratic behavior. Once we have control of the business assets and the accounts, we can look into that specialized care facility in Scottsdale. It's incredibly expensive, but the company can afford it once you restructure. It's a nice place, David. He'll be comfortable, and he'll be out of the way. They were going to lock me in a memory care facility, my own wife, my own flesh and blood. They were going to strip me of my life's work, steal my money, pump my company full of toxic debt, and lock me away in a home for the bewildered. They were going to condemn me to a living death, surrounded by locked doors and nurses, all so David could play hotshot CEO and Helen could maintain her lavish lifestyle without having to deal with a husband she clearly viewed as an obstacle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't smash anything in my study. 35 years of marriage, 34 years of fatherhood, evaporated in a 3-minute audio clip. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it completely bypassed my emotions. It burned right through the grief and went straight into the cold, calculated, mechanical part of my brain. The part of my brain that knew how to read blueprints, measure tolerances, and build a multi-million-dollar empire from a single rusted lathe. They wanted to play games. Fine, but I was going to write the rules. I spent the next 2 months playing the role of the confused, declining old man to absolute perfection. I leaned into it so hard I deserve an Oscar. I asked Helen the same question twice at breakfast. I forgot where I parked my truck at the grocery store, forcing her to come pick me up. At the office, I let David take the lead in meetings while I sat back, rubbed my temples, and looked overwhelmed and exhausted. They were thrilled. I could see the smug satisfaction in their eyes when they looked at each other. They thought they were brilliant. They thought I was a broken, dying old dog. But behind their backs, while they were picking out drapes for my future padded cell, I was working. Years ago, before I married Helen, my father passed away and left me a modest inheritance of about $40,000. I used that exact money, entirely separate from any marital assets, to incorporate Arthur's precision machining. I kept the corporate structure ironclad from day one. Helen was never a shareholder. She was never on the board. The business belonged entirely to me, and more importantly, it was shielded by a very specific, very robust prenuptial agreement we signed back in 1987. Back then, Helen thought my machine shop was a foolish pipe dream. She had a small trust fund from her grandfather, and she demanded the prenup to protect her money from my inevitable bankruptcy. I reached out to Titan Manufacturing. Titan is a massive, ruthless, multinational corporate conglomerate based in Chicago. They are the apex predators of the machining world. They've been trying to buy me out for the last 6 years. I've always refused them because they have a brutal reputation. They buy independent shops, absorb their contracts, liquidate the redundant staff, sell off the older machines, and wring every cent of profit out of the operation. They are corporate sharks. I flew to Chicago under the guise of visiting a renowned neurologist. I sat down with Titan's acquisitions board in a glass skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. I looked the CEO in the eye and told him I was ready to sell. Cash buyout. Complete, unconditional handover of all assets, client lists, intellectual property, machinery, and the physical real estate. My asking price was $4.2 million. Because my books were immaculate, my margins were incredible, and I held long-term defense contracts they desperately wanted. They barely haggled. They agreed to $4.2 million, pending a rapid 30-day due diligence. We fast-tracked it. I had my personal lawyers, men who had been loyal to me for 20 years, men who hated David handled the paperwork in absolute secrecy. We used encrypted emails and burner phones. At the same time, I hired the most ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorney in the state. We drafted the papers. Because of our prenuptial agreement and the meticulous way I had isolated the business assets over the decades, Helen was entitled to exactly half of our shared bank accounts and half the equity in our house. That was it. She had absolutely no legal claim to the company or the proceeds of its sale. I signed the final, irrevocable sale documents for Arthur's Precision Machining on a Tuesday afternoon. The $4.2 million was wired directly into a newly established private trust account that neither Helen nor David knew existed, located in a bank 3 states away. The very next evening, I came home from work at 6 o'clock. As I pulled up to my house, I saw the cars parked in my driveway. Dr. Evans' silver Mercedes, my son's leased Porsche, an unfamiliar black Lexus. I took a deep breath. Showtime. I unlocked the front door and walked into the living room. There they were, sitting in a semicircle, Helen looking grave and deeply concerned, David trying to look somber but failing to hide the greedy twitch in his jaw, Dr. Evans adjusting his glasses, and a slick-looking, expensive lawyer I didn't recognize sitting with a leather briefcase on his lap. "Arthur," Helen said, standing up and using her softest, most falsely sympathetic voice. "Come sit down, honey. We need to talk." An intervention. They were springing the trap. I took off my coat, hung it up slowly in the hall closet, and walked into the living room. I didn't sit down. I stood by the stone fireplace, looking down at them. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice intentionally shaky and weak. David stepped forward, holding a thick, legal manila envelope. "Dad, we love you. You know we do, but we can't watch you decline like this anymore. Your memory is failing. You're becoming erratic. You're putting the business and our family's future at risk. We've spoken to Dr. Evans at length, and based on his clinical observations and the severe incidents over the last few months, he believes you are suffering from rapid onset cognitive decline." Dr. Evans cleared his throat and looked at me with textbook fake pity. "Arthur, it's for your own good. You need specialized, round-the-clock care. The stress of running the company is accelerating your condition. You're a danger to yourself." "So, what does this mean?" I asked, gripping the mantle like I needed it for support. The slick lawyer spoke up, opening his briefcase. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Robert Vance. I represent your family's interests. We have drafted a voluntary relinquishment of executive control. By signing this document, you transfer all your voting shares and executive authority to your son, David. It also grants your wife, Helen, full medical and financial power of attorney. If you refuse to sign..." The lawyer paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "We are prepared to go to a judge tomorrow morning with Dr. Evans' sworn medical affidavit to seek an involuntary conservatorship. For the sake of your family's dignity and to avoid a messy public court battle, we highly recommend you sign the papers now." David pulled a fancy Mont Blanc fountain pen from his breast pocket and held it out to me. His eyes were practically glowing. "Just sign it, Dad. I'll take care of the company. Mom will take care of you. You can finally rest." I looked at the pen. I looked at the legal document on the coffee table. Then I looked at Helen. She was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the tragic, supportive wife to perfection. I stopped leaning on the mantel. I stood up perfectly straight. I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of heavy stock paper, and tossed it onto the coffee table right on top of their fraudulent medical affidavit. "I don't think I'll be signing that, David," I said. My voice wasn't shaky anymore. It wasn't weak. It was hard, loud, and cut through the room like a bandsaw through aluminum. David frowned, his hand still holding out the pen. He picked up the stack of papers I had thrown down. He read the cover page. It took about 3 seconds for the reality to hit his brain. The color instantly, violently drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach by a heavyweight. His mouth opened and closed silently. "What? What the hell is this?" he whispered. "That," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "is a finalized, legally binding, fully executed asset purchase agreement. As of yesterday afternoon at 4 p.m., Arthur's Precision Machining has been acquired in its entirety by Titan Manufacturing. I don't own the company anymore, and neither do you." She stared at me, horrified. "Arthur, what have you done? You can't do that. You don't have the mental capacity. We have a medical affidavit." "You have a fraudulent piece of paper signed by a corrupt country club hack of a doctor," I snapped. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the living room Bluetooth speakers. I hit play on the audio file. The living room was suddenly filled with the crisp, clear sound of Helen and David's voices from 2 months ago in my office. "He's too stubborn. All we need is for Arthur to have one more major episode in front of witnesses, and Evans will sign the affidavit, lock him in a memory care facility." I deleted the entire Boeing email thread today. Silence descended on the room like a suffocating, heavy blanket. Dr. Evans turned the color of spoiled milk. He slowly sank back into his chair, his hands visibly shaking. The slick lawyer, Vance, went rigid. He looked at his clients like they were suddenly radioactive. As an attorney, he immediately realized he had just been unknowingly roped into a criminal conspiracy to commit medical and financial fraud. "I know everything," I said, looking right into Helen's terrified, wide eyes. "I know about the deleted emails. I know about the missing keys. I know about the altered Lockheed blueprints. I know you spent the last 8 months trying to gaslight me into believing my brain was rotting so you could steal my life's work and lock me in an asylum." "Dad, wait, please, you don't understand," David stammered, dropping the Titan contract on the floor. "Shut up," I roared. The sheer force of my voice made him physically flinch backward. "You entitled, lazy piece of garbage. You thought you could outsmart me? You thought you could steal a company you don't know how to run? You don't know the first thing about work, David. You don't know what it takes to build something, and you're about to find out exactly how hard the real world is without my money protecting you." I turned to Helen and handed her a second, thinner envelope. She took it with trembling hands. "These are divorce papers," I said coldly. "Per our prenuptial agreement from 1987, you get exactly half the house equity and half of our joint checking account. That comes out to about $300,000. The $4.2 million in cash from the sale of my business is mine, entirely shielded by the prenup, and you will never see a single cent of it." "Arthur, please," Helen sobbed. And these weren't fake tears anymore. This was absolute primal panic. 35 years, you can't just throw me out. Where am I supposed to go? "You are going to lock me in an asylum," I yelled, pointing a finger directly in her face. "You are going to throw me away. Get out, all of you. Get out of my house right now before I call the police and hand them this recording. Dr. Evans, I will be reporting you to the state medical board on Monday morning with the audio file attached. Have fun defending your medical license against a felony fraud charge." The lawyer didn't say a word. He just snapped his briefcase shut, stood up, and practically sprinted out the front door. He knew his career was on the line if he stayed in that room a second longer. Dr. Evans followed right behind him, stumbling over his own feet, looking like he was going to throw up on my front lawn. Helen and David just sat there, completely broken, staring at the floor. They realized that their brilliant, cruel scheme hadn't just failed. It had detonated in their faces and destroyed their entire lives. I gave them exactly 1 hour to pack 2 suitcases each and leave my property. They were gone in 45 minutes. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, Titan Manufacturing officially took over the shop floor. The first thing their ruthless corporate efficiency team did was review the executive payroll. They called David into the HR office at 9:30 a.m. They fired him on the spot with 0 severance package. They told him his VP role was entirely redundant, his performance metrics were abysmal, and he possessed no actual skills useful to the company. From what my old shop foreman told me over a beer last night, David actually cried in the parking lot as security escorted him to his Porsche, which Titan immediately repossessed since it was a company lease. Helen is currently living in a cramped 2-bedroom rented condo across town. She hired a forensic accountant, desperate to try and find a loophole to touch the $4.2 million. But my lawyers built an impenetrable fortress around that trust. The prenup held up perfectly in front of the judge. She has no skills, no recent work history, and her country club friends dropped her the second they realized she was broke and getting a divorce. She's going to have to get a minimum wage job for the first time in 35 years just to afford groceries. Dr. Evans is currently under investigation by the state medical board and has taken an indefinite leave of absence from his practice. As for me, I'm perfectly healthy. My memory is sharp. My mind is clear. Next week, I'm closing on a beautiful, secluded log cabin on a lake up in Montana. I'm going to spend my days fishing, working on restoring classic cars in my new garage, and enjoying a quiet, peaceful retirement. I lost my wife and my son, but the truth is, looking back at the recording, I lost them a long, long time ago. At least now, I know the truth. And I've got 4.2 million reasons not to care.